In a city of gray, she was the only color that refused to fade. But when a billionaire walked into her studio, offering her the commission of a lifetime, she didn't know she was stepping into an experiment, one designed to break her heart. The air in Lena Hart's small studio was thick with the familiar, comforting sense of turpentine and linseed oil. Canvases, some finished, many more in various states of becoming, leaned against every available wall. It was a world of controlled chaos, of vibrant color struggling against the gray cityscape outside her window, a world she understood. The email that arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon felt like a dispatch from another planet. It was from the office of Adrian Vale, a name synonymous with silicon and staggering wealth. He wanted a portrait. The fee mentioned was a number that made Lena's breath catch, enough to cover 2 years of rent and supplies without a second thought. She accepted, her fingers trembling slightly on the keyboard, a mix of exhilaration and profound disbelief coursing through her. Her first meeting with Adrian Vale was held in the stark, minimalist penthouse that served as his personal sanctuary high above the city. The room was a study in cool tones and sharp angles, a place where nothing was out of order. He was exactly as the financial magazines portrayed him, impeccably dressed, with a gaze that was both intense and impossibly distant. He greeted her with a practiced, polished charm that felt more like a corporate strategy than a genuine welcome. He explained he wanted something traditional, a portrait for the boardroom, something that conveyed stability and legacy. Lena set up her easel, her artist's eye immediately noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes. He was a beautiful subject, all sharp cheekbones and calculated poise, but he felt more like a sculpture than a man. The sessions began. Lena would arrive each Tuesday and Thursday, her presence seemingly a minor scheduled event in his meticulously planned life. She worked in silence at first, sketching, studying the planes of his face. She tried to make conversation, asking about his work, his interests. His answers were polite, succinct, and utterly devoid of personal detail. It was as if he were a fortress, and every window was shuttered. But Lena was an artist, and her medium was not just paint, but perception. She began to see past the billionaire facade. She noticed the faint shadow of fatigue under his eyes, the way he would sometimes stare out at the cityscape, his expression not one of ownership, but of isolation. She saw the ghost of something wounded lurking behind the controlled facade. One afternoon, she brought a small portable speaker and played a piece of soft classical music. He did not comment, but she saw the rigid line of his shoulders relax just a fraction. Another time, she candidly told him a story about a disastrous art show from her early 20s, complete with a collapsing display and a pot of magenta paint upturned on a critic's white suit. To her astonishment, a real, unvarnished laugh escaped him. It was a warm, rich sound that transformed his entire face. The ice was cracking. Slowly, carefully, he began to talk. He spoke of his love for architecture, for the precise logic of mathematics. And then, one rainy evening, as the session ran long, he told her about Alara. His voice was low, stripped of its usual authority. Alara had been his fiancée, his partner, his confidant. She had been with him from the early scrappy days of his company. And then, just before their wedding, she had sold his company's most valuable intellectual property, the blueprint for his next revolutionary project, to his biggest competitor. She had disappeared, leaving behind a note and a multi-million-dollar wire transfer. "She taught me the price of trust," he said, his gaze fixed on the rain-streaked glass. "It has a very precise, quantifiable figure." Lena's heart ached for him. She saw the man now, not the monument. She saw the profound betrayal that had frozen something vital within him. Her brushstrokes became more intuitive, more tender. She was no longer painting the tech titan Adrian Vale. She was painting the man who loved Bach, who remembered what it was like to build something from nothing, the man who had his heart carved out by the person he loved most. Their professional relationship dissolved into something else entirely. The portrait sessions became long, meandering conversations. He started showing up at her studio unannounced, shedding his suit jacket for a simple sweater, looking more at ease surrounded by her beautiful mess than he ever did in his own sterile penthouse. He swept her into his world, a dizzying carousel of private jets, charity galas, and whispered introductions to people whose faces she only knew from news screens. It was a world of intoxicating luxury and unspoken power, but at its center was a connection that felt faded, real, and desperately fragile. He was learning to trust again, and she was the teacher. The portrait was nearly finished. It was, she knew, the best work of her life. It captured his intelligence, his strength, but also the vulnerability in his eyes, the slight hopeful softening around his mouth that only appeared when he looked at her. She was putting the final touches on the background, her heart full of a quiet, soaring joy when her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, but the message was chillingly specific. Ask him about the Siren Protocol. A cold dread trickled down her spine. The Siren Protocol was the name of the project Alara had stolen. Why would a stranger bring that up now? That evening, she confronted Adrian. They were in his penthouse, the city lights glittering like a field of diamonds below them. At the mention of the name, his face closed off, the shutters slamming down instantly. "Where did you hear that?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Someone texted me. Who was it, Adrian?" He turned away from her, his posture rigid. "It doesn't matter. It's in the past." But it did matter. The seed of doubt had been planted. Later that night, while he slept, a compulsion she knew was wrong but could not ignore drove her to his study. His laptop was on, his email open. Her eyes, traitorous and searching, fell on a chain of emails with his head of security. She scanned them, her blood running colder with each word. The emails detailed her own background check, her financial records, her past relationships. And then she saw it. The final email sent just before he first contacted her. The subject line was Project Chimera. The text was clinical. The subject, Lena Hart, has been selected. Proceed with the initial engagement. The parameters of the test remain unchanged to determine, under sustained and intimate observation, whether an individual of ostensibly strong moral character can be compromised or their loyalty broken. The portrait is the pretext. Report all findings. Lena stumbled back from the desk as if she had been struck. The world tilted on its axis. The studio, the laughter, the whispered confessions in the dark, the way he had looked at her as if she were the only real thing in his glittering world, all of it was a lie. The portrait was never about art. It was a laboratory. She was the experiment. He was the scientist, coldly observing whether the heart of a good person could be won just to see if it could be done. A twisted attempt to prove that everyone, deep down, was as faithless as Alara. The trust she had worked so hard to build was not a treasure he valued. It was a variable he was testing. And she had passed, or failed, she didn't even know, but the result was the same. She was just data. The silence in the penthouse was a physical presence, thick and suffocating, pressing in on them from the tastefully minimalist walls and the panoramic windows that now seemed to reflect only a void. Lena stood, a ghost of the woman she had been just an hour before, the vibrant, hopeful artist erased, replaced by a statue carved from the cold, unyielding marble of betrayal. The air still hummed with the memory of their earlier laughter, a cruel echo that made the present stillness all the more profound. It was all a test? Her voice was a whisper, scraped raw from the effort of forcing sound past the constriction in her throat. The words hung in the air, ugly and misshapen. "You hired me because you thought I was one of them? Someone sent to, finish what Alara started?" Each syllable was a shard of glass, cutting her from the inside as she spoke it into existence. Adrian's face was ashen, a stark contrast to the confident mask he usually presented to the world. The control he wore like a second skin, tailored and impeccable, had shattered, revealing the raw, panicked vulnerability beneath. "Lena, it's not that simple," he pleaded, the words sounding feeble even to his own ears, a pathetic defense against the cataclysm he had engineered. "It seems very simple to me." The words erupted, a geyser of anguish fueled by a pain so acute it felt like a physical wound being torn open. All the tender moments, the whispered secrets in the dark, the way he had looked at her as if she were the only real thing in his gilded world, it all curdled into something monstrous. "You thought I was a spy. So you decided to play with me, to see how close I'd let you get. Was any of it real? A single moment?" She was begging now, desperate for one anchor of truth in the landslide of his deception. It became real. He took a step toward her, his hand outstretched, a futile gesture toward a bridge he had already incinerated. "Everything after the first week, everything we shared, that was me. That was real." He willed her to see the truth in his eyes, to sift the genuine from the fraudulent, but he could see only her devastation reflected back at him. "Don't!" She recoiled as if his touch were acid, the simple movement of final, absolute severance. "You don't get to say that. You built this entire relationship on a lie. You were studying me, reporting on me." The humiliation was a hot flush, remembering how open she had been, how she had offered up her past and her passions, all while he was meticulously cataloging it for signs of treachery. She grabbed her bag, her hand shaking too violently to properly fasten the strap, the clumsy fumbling a perfect mirror of her inner state. "The portrait is finished. Our business is concluded." She fled then, a swift and silent retreat, leaving the masterpiece on the easel, a breathtaking rendering of the man she thought she knew, and the ruins of their trust, cold and crumbling, at his feet. The weeks that followed were a desolate landscape for them both, a monochrome expanse of regret and solitude. Lena buried herself in the stark, paint-splattered sanctuary of her studio, channeling her fury and grief onto vast canvases. She painted furious, abstract storms of color, great swirling vortexes of bruised purple and angry red that reflected the chaos in her soul, the beautiful order of her art shattered into emotional entropy. She ignored his calls, the persistent buzz of his texts, the extravagant flowers that arrived daily with their silent pleas, only to be tossed unopened into the bin with a finality that felt both satisfying and hollow. For Adrian, his empire, once a source of immense pride, now felt hollow, a beautifully appointed cage. The boardroom victories were ash in his mouth, the financial reports meaningless columns of numbers. He had spent years fortifying his heart against betrayal, building walls of suspicion and strategy, only to become the very betrayer he feared. He had been so busy looking for ghosts in Lena's honest past that he missed the one taking root, insidious and patient, in his own present, his genuine, uncalculated love for her. It was his head of security, a man named Evans whose loyalty he had never once questioned, who finally forced the confrontation. "The leak is internal, Adrian," Evans stated, his expression grim, a mask of concerned efficiency, "and the data points are leading back to your inner circle, the same pattern as before." The same pattern. The realization hit Adrian with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. He had been so focused on the outsider, on the potential threat Lena posed, that he had never turned his scrutinizing gaze upon the people he shook hands with every day, the people he trusted with his company's most vital secrets. The real threat had been hiding in plain sight, a serpent in his inner sanctum, using his master's paranoia about the painter as the perfect smokescreen for its own slow, deliberate poison. He discovered the truth too late, the pieces of the puzzle snapping into a damning picture only as the world collapsed. The news broke on a Friday, a tidal wave of financial ruin. Vale Enterprises was under a hostile takeover bid, orchestrated by a complex web of shell companies that traced back with infuriating clarity to none other than Evans himself, who had been quietly, methodically working with Adrian's most ruthless rivals for years. The empire he had built, the fortress he had constructed brick by brick to keep the world out, was crumbling from within, and he saw now that he had handed the wrecking ball to the traitor himself. In that moment of catastrophic loss, as his life's work teetered on the brink, Adrian's clarity was absolute, a diamond forged in the fires of his own folly. He had been a fool, a king so afraid of a shadow from beyond his walls that he failed to notice the coup brewing in his own court. He had driven away the one genuine thing in his life, the woman whose only crime was seeing the man behind the billionaire and loving him. Lena wasn't his destruction. She was his only possible redemption, and he had cast her out to preserve a kingdom already lost. He found her at her studio, not with flowers or empty promises, but with a stack of documents and a single, unadorned USB drive. He looked tired, stripped of his aristocratic armor, just a man standing in the aftermath of his own mistakes. "It was Evans," he said, his voice quiet, devoid of all its former authority. "The real betrayal was standing beside me all along. I was so blind." Lena stood rigid, her arms crossed over her chest, not in defiance, but as a last desperate barrier to protect a heart he had helped turn into a fortress. The sight of him, broken and sincere, threatened the foundations of her resolve. "I'm sorry for your company," she said, her tone icy, each word a piece of the wall she had built between them. "I don't care about the company," he said, and the raw, unvarnished truth of it was evident in the hollows of his eyes and the slump of his shoulders. I care about you. I was wrong. Not just mistaken, but profoundly, cruelly wrong. I built my life on a foundation of suspicion, and I almost let it destroy the only thing that ever truly mattered. He placed the documents on her work table, the thick parchment a stark contrast to the chaotic splatters of paint. These are the ownership deeds for my new project, the one I started after we met, the one your passion inspired. It's in your name. And this, he held up the drive like an offering, is every piece of evidence I have against Evans. I am giving you the power to destroy me, Lena. My fortune, my reputation. It's yours to do with as you please. I am risking everything because without you, it is all worthless. He turned to leave, offering her the one thing he had never given anyone. Not a board member, not a rival, not a lover. Absolute, unconditional vulnerability. It was the final, desperate gamble of a man with nothing left to lose. Adrian. Her voice, softer now, stopped him at the door. He turned, his eyes filled with a desperate, fragile hope that was terrifying in its intensity. She looked from the documents, a king's ransom and a testament to his guilt, to the man who had just handed her his entire world as an apology. The ice around her heart cracked, not with a dramatic shatter, but with a slow, melting thaw. She saw not the billionaire, not the master strategist, but the haunted man she had fallen in love with, finally standing free of his own ghost, willing to be seen for exactly who he was. She didn't touch the deeds, that symbol of transactional appeasement. Instead, she walked to him, her steps sure on the familiar floor, and took his hand, her paint-stained fingers lacing with his. "Don't give your empire away," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears and the fragile beginnings of forgiveness. "Just promise you'll never build another wall between us." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her as if she were the most precious, fragile thing in the world, which to him, she finally, unquestionably was. "I promise." He breathed into her hair, the words of vow sealed in the quiet of the room. No more lies, just us. And in the quiet of the studio, surrounded by the vibrant, chaotic proof of her heart spilled onto canvas, they began again. Not on a foundation of lies and strategic half-truths, but on the fragile, unshakable ground of a hard-won truth, ready to be built upon, together.